In January of 1999, the world was introduced to the future of the animated Batman franchise via the new show Batman Beyond. From the same creative team as the wildly popular Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, and the new Batman Adventures, Batman Beyond would bring us the neon futuristic world of Neo Gotham and the brand new Batman that sprung up to protect it from a whole new generation of misfits and miscreants. Unless you lived outside of the US where the show was retitled Batman of the Future. Apparently just calling it Batman Beyond would be too confusing for us Europeans. Better to eradicate the beautiful alliterative symmetry and give us a title so on the nose that it insults my intelligence every time I hear it, even 25 years later. But I digress. The creative team behind the show had an uphill battle ahead of them. The DCAU version of Batman is widely considered to be the best version of Batman, and introducing his replacement, a teen replacement nonetheless, was doubtlessly very challenging. It'd be too easy to fall into the trap of simply making him Bruce Wayne 2.0 or going in completely the opposite direction and alienating fans. Think of the short-lived James Bond Jr. cartoon. However, 25 years later, I think we can safely say that they knocked it out of the park with their Batman of the future, Terry McGinnis. Before going into the character's origins, first let's talk about the genesis of Batman Beyond. In 1998, while the new Batman Adventures and Superman the Animated Series were still in production, one Friday afternoon producers Bruce Timm, Paul Dini and Alan Burnett met with Warner Brothers executive Jamie Kellner to talk about what they'd be working on next. The trio fully expected TNBA and STAS to be renewed, so confident were they that they even ended that season of Superman on a cliffhanger of sorts, with Superman vowing to regain the world's trust after he'd been brainwashed by Darkseid. However, the Warner Brothers executives had a different plan in mind. In the pursuit of an even younger demographic and inspired by the then popular show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Warner Brothers had decided that they needed to freshen things up with a new show starring a teenaged Batman. The original proposal was the adventures of teenage Bruce Wayne, but of course that would have contradicted everything that had already been established. Bruce Wayne didn't put on the Batman costume until he was in his 20s, as seen in Mask of the Phantasm. So, as you might imagine, Timm, Dini and Burnett were not entirely thrilled at the prospect of scrapping everything and starting over. But at the same time, they also feared giving up Batman and handing it over to a new creative team. It was then that the idea of a teenage replacement for an elderly Batman was brought up, and the show was greenlit there and then, meaning they had to finish off the remaining TNBA and STAS episodes and start working on the new show immediately. In his Modern Masters book, Bruce Timm recalls how he spent the weekend fretting about the whole concept behind the show, but it wasn't until the following Monday when he explained what happened to Glenn Murakami and was greeted by Murakami's boundless enthusiasm for the idea that they started to take things seriously. Now, the reason I bring this up is that Warner Brothers were very enthusiastic about the idea without even seeing any scripts or character designs. In fact, they would even start promoting the show in Wizard magazine, a now defunct comic book fan magazine, using the working title of Batman Tomorrow, with its protagonist Terry McGavin. Both the title and the protagonist's name would change by the time we saw the full show, of course. I think that most people watching this video will already be pretty familiar with who Terry McGinnis is and how he came to become Batman, so I'll try to keep this synopsis brief. We're introduced to Terry in the first episode of Batman Beyond, Rebirth Part 1. Terry is a 17-year-old high school student with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. His mother and father are divorced and he lives with his father, while his younger brother lives with their mother. Terry is a little rough around the edges, but he seems to have a good heart. When we first meet him, he comes to the defense of a woman being bothered by a punk dressed as a clown. He doesn't do it for the glory or because he likes looking for trouble, although I suppose there might be an element of that. It's primarily the fact that he doesn't like bullies and refuses to stand by and watch people be victimised, which will come back to bite him on the rear end. Repeatedly. After a glimpse at his school life in which he gets suspended after coming to blows with school bully Nelson Nash, we can see that, while Terry's heart is often in the right place, he doesn't respond proportionally. Likewise, when he returns home and is scolded by his father Warren, Terry lashes out at him and heads out for the evening. While queuing up to get into a nightclub with his girlfriend Dana Tan, Terry comes into conflict with more punks dressed as clowns. The Jokers. These wannabe clown princes of crime clearly idolise the Joker and go around town causing mischief on their motorcycles. Think the biker gang from the movie Akira, but with clown face paint. While trying to evade the Jokers, he crosses paths with an elderly Bruce Wayne, who, despite his age, brutalises the gang members, but not without making himself unwell. Terry, being the kind soul that he is, takes the ailing Bruce home and gets him his heart medicine. Along the way, he spots a bat seemingly trapped within a grandfather clock. Most people probably would have just ignored the animal's distressed cries, but Terry couldn't ignore it and tries to let the bat out, and in the process discovers the Bat Cave. After being cast out by Bruce, Terry heads home with his tail between his legs, only to find his home vandalised with Joker graffiti and his father dead. The reasonable assumption to make is that the Jokers he had fought earlier that evening had somehow figured out where he lived and killed his father in revenge. As such, Terry blames himself for his father's death and is haunted by their final angry conversation. So right off the bat, lol. Here's what we know about our new Batman. He's compassionate. He saw a woman in distress and stepped in to defend her. When Bruce fell ill, he helped him. He saw an animal in distress and wanted to help it. He doesn't like bullies. He thrashed Nelson and the Jokers. He's hot-tempered. He reacted badly to Nelson spitting in his face. He lashed out at his father for not understanding him. He's trustworthy. He learns Bruce Wayne's secret and doesn't tell anyone. Now, Terry is clearly very different to Batman's past protégés. The Robins were trained from childhood to fight crime. Terry came to it much later and did a lot of on-the-job training. As such, Terry is very much his own Batman. Yes, he is driven by tragedy, the murder of his father, but he solves that case in his first adventure.
I took care of his old man, didn't I?
This is significantly different to the original Batman. The DCAU Batman never solved the murder of his parents, because it wasn't really a crime to solve. It was an opportunistic, random act of violence. The killer saw the chance to make a quick buck and took it, fleeing into the night once he realised what he'd done, and was never seen again. By never getting closure, Batman would be compelled to solve crime in the hope of preventing other people experiencing the same despair that he did. Terry, meanwhile, remains in the role of Batman because he believes it's the right thing to do. He's not driven by the need for vengeance, although he does cite some feelings of guilt over his childhood misdeeds, fighting and stealing mostly, and sees his work as Batman as being a way of atoning. Bruce is physically incapable of continuing his mission as Batman, as we see in the opening of Rebirth, but in Terry he sees a way of continuing his mission by being a mentor. At this point, Bruce had been locked away in his mansion for years, living a solitary life. He had let his company be taken over by the villainous Derek Powers, and frankly, he didn't care. By mentoring Terry, Batman would begin rehabilitating his own life as well. Yes, he would always be a grumpy curmudgeon, but Bruce would begin reintegrating himself into Neo-Gotham society. Firstly, by taking Terry on as assistant. After all, he needs a good excuse for Terry to be spending all that time with him, and the wages he pays would go some way towards providing some financial stability to the McGinnises after Warren's death. Bruce would then become more involved in the runnings of his company, until he eventually regained full control from Powers after his meltdown as Blight. And that's the key thing about the relationship between Terry and Bruce Wayne. They saved each other. Without Bruce's guidance, Terry would very easily have found himself making the same mistakes over and over again, and probably find himself in prison. And without Terry, Bruce would have remained hidden away in Wayne Manor for the rest of his days. And I think that's one of the key reasons why Terry McGinnis is so beloved by the fans. He isn't a carbon copy of Bruce Wayne. He's his own person with his own desires and flaws, and he adds to the Batman mythos. One episode that really highlights the complementary differences between the two Batmen is Meltdown. I've talked about this episode a number of times, and come to think of it, it's probably my favourite episode because it deals with the rehabilitation of Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze was a significant character in the DC animated universe. Heart of Ice transformed the character from a gimmicky, cult-themed villain to a tragic figure that sought revenge. This take on the character would go on to be adopted across every other form of media, including the comic books. By the time of Batman Beyond, Freeze is a head in a jar, locked away in the basement of Wayne Powers. The villainous Derek Powers uses Freeze as a guinea pig for a potential treatment for his own ailment. By cloning Freeze a new body, editing out the mutated DNA and transferring his mind into this body in the hope that Freeze would be cured and be able to start over. With his humanity restored, Freeze renounces his past criminality and pledges to dedicate himself and the significant amount of cash in his savings account to righting the wrongs of the world. Terry is fully on board with supporting Mr. Freeze's rehabilitation and is willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Bruce, meanwhile, is convinced that it's only a matter of time before Freeze reverts to his villainous ways. Of course, Bruce's cynicism would be proven correct. When Freeze's body begins to deteriorate again, Powers orders him to be killed so that they can examine his organs to figure out what went wrong. And just like that, Mr. Freeze returns and enacts his vengeance by murdering the treacherous Dr. Lake, trying to kill Powers, and blowing up the facility that he was housed in, effectively killing himself. Terry pleads with Freeze in his final moments, asking him to come with him. It's not too late, he can still put things right. However, Freeze rejects the offer and puts up an icy wall, both figuratively and literally, leaving Terry no choice but to run. Bruce and Terry survey the wreckage the next morning and note that, despite their different views on Freeze, they were both right about him. Terry was correct that Victor Freeze was a man who should have been given a chance to make amends for his past misdeeds, while Bruce was right that it was only a matter of time before Mr. Freeze would rear his ugly head. Terry is an optimist that sees the best in people, while Bruce is a bit more pragmatic. Some would say cynical, but I think that depends on your view on life. And this is a really neat way of summarising the differences between the two Batmen, and how they complement each other. And I have to think that's one of the reasons why the fans have embraced Terry. It would be at this point in the video that I would go on to talk about how the character has gone on to be represented in the comic books, and yeah, Terry McGinnis is part of the mainline DC continuity now, hooray. However, outside of the first two series, Batman Beyond and Batman Beyond Volume 2, both of which were primarily written by Hilary J. Bader, who wrote almost a dozen episodes of Batman Beyond, including Meltdown, DC Comics have mismanaged the concept of Batman Beyond. Part of the reason for this mismanagement is that the whole concept just doesn't fit with their established continuity. In the mainline comics, Batman has created a clear line of succession. After he is no longer able to be Batman, Dick Grayson was expected to take the role. If he wasn't able to, then it would go to Tim Drake. And if he wasn't able to, then it would go to Bruce's son, Damian. And there have been multiple stories over the years of different Robins, as well as a few other supporting characters, picking up the mantle of Batman. Terry McGinnis being mentored by an isolated, elderly Bruce Wayne is the proverbial square peg that doesn't quite fit. The Batman Beyond character first appeared in Superman Batman 22, and it was Tim Drake wearing the costume. Terry McGinnis would eventually appear during the lead up to the Future's End crossover, in which he travelled back in time to prevent the rise of Brother Eye, a powerful supercomputer that would enslave humanity. However, he would be killed, passing the mantle to a time-travelling Tim Drake. Thankfully, this was retconned fairly swiftly, with Terry reclaiming the costume. However, in my opinion, most of the Batman Beyond comics from Batman Beyond Volume 3 onwards have not hit the mark. Part of the problem is that they ignore the teachings of the show. The show's writers were adamant that Terry should be his own Batman with his own villains and threats, and there were very few occasions where old villains returned, and that made them all the more special. It also allowed Terry to develop his own identity and not just battle the same people that Bruce Wayne did. Those comics, however, have mostly focused on retreading old ground, with Catwoman 2.0, The Return of the Phantasm, Man-Bat, and more recently pitting Terry against the Court of Owls, which I just find really tedious. And don't get me started on their attempts to answer fan questions like what happened to Dick Grayson. I view those comics as little more than glorified fan fiction, and as such, they're pretty easy to ignore. There is a reason why they never answered most of those questions in the show. And that's because our existence is fleeting. The majority of us will wind up being forgotten within a generation or two of our passing, no matter how significant our contributions to society are. And that is such a beautiful, melancholic sentiment that I really resent those comics for tarnishing it. Okay, I'm getting a bit sidetracked now and going down the melancholic path again, sorry. To close things out, I want to acknowledge the Justice League Unlimited episode Epilogue, which acted as closure for the Batman in the DCAU. If you're a fan of Batman Beyond and you haven't watched it, do so at your earliest convenience. I'm not going to talk about that episode at this point because, frankly, it opens a huge can of worms that is well worth an entire video essay on its own, and I will go into it in the future. Just know that yes, I have seen it, and yes, I understand the impact it has on Batman Beyond's legacy, but I think the overall message at the end of the episode reinforces what I've said so far. Terry's biggest strength is that he isn't Bruce Wayne. He's his own man with his own flaws. Okay, that's the end of this week's video essay. This is the first in a series of Batman Beyond-centric video essays that I'm writing to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Batman Beyond. Hooray! If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the video, tell all your friends about me, because it really helps. Another great way to help me out would be to make use of the thanks button. You can donate $1 or $2 to help me maintain the quality of these videos. Likewise, I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essays, sporadic members-only videos, priority responses to your comments, an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my members, and custom emojis. I'm going to be back next week with a video looking at how Batman Beyond was intended to be an all-ages, kid-friendly show, and how it spectacularly failed in that regard. Hope to see you then.